Hi, good morning. Today
Good
is
morning.
January 30th. Nick is having a little issue with screen sharing, so you won't be seeing like cards that come up due to some internet issues. But let's say the four measurables to set our intention and aspirations today, even though the card is not coming up. I'm sure most of you know it by now. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all beings not be separated from the happiness that has never known suffering. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment, anger, and aversion. For those of you who, I post on Instagram, to announce the class, but I also, in stories, post a lot of teachings, repost them, from other pages by really great teachers. So I'm always been talking about finding teachers, connecting with teachers, reading their books. Some of them are still with us, so you can attend classes. They even do empowerments now via Zoom. You don't have to actually be in person, and you may attend classes in person if you're able to, as things continue to open up, and if it's in your area or you want to travel to it. But even in the hashtags, when I post about this class, I name some teachers. There's one in particular we've been watching a lot lately, Chondro Rinpoche, who I really go on YouTube. There's lots of teachings by her, and she's just amazing. She's just brilliant. Khandro, Khandro Rinpoche. And she has some centers here in the U.S. as well as I think Europe and Asia. And she's one of the best teaching today. And she said something interesting. One of the teachings talking about compassion. So compassion, as we talk about it in this class, is actually translated from bodhicitta, really, in Buddhist terms. And it's a little bit different. I think often we talk about compassion as this thing of almost pity, feeling sorry, and selective compassion. I think what we have to work on is this quality of bodhicitta, which is, what does it translate exactly as, the words bodhicitta?
It means mind of awakening.
It means mind of awakening.
Body is awakened and chitta is mind.
So think mind of awakening is very different than our conception of what compassion necessarily is. And mind of awakening, bodhicitta, is not selective compassion. So it's not compassion for people you think are worthy of compassion. And that's the difference. I think all of us have ideas on who deserves our compassion. It's very easy to be compassionate for, you see somebody suffering on when they have the St. Jude commercials as children suffering from terminal diseases, and we all have compassion for them and their families logically, and that makes a lot of sense. But the mind of awakening is about all beings. When we say the four immeasurable prayers, it's about all beings. Now, in the beginning, where we're at now, it's very hard to cultivate that kind of mind. But that's where we're headed, folks. If you're here and you keep coming here, this is where we're headed. This is what, and it's this is what Buddhism really is about. And it's very much tied into the view of Buddhism, which deals with interdependence, impermanence, and emptiness, and non-duality. So when you think of it in those terms, it becomes a much more vast aspiration. It's a much more vast concept, and it should not just remain a concept. Should be something that comes, is something that arises in us as part of whatever spiritual path we're on, and awakening hopefully we have. So there's a teaching on YouTube, Compassion and versus Competition, I think it's called, Chondro Rinpoche, and she goes into this in a lot more detail. Victoria is going to go into the Trey's going to go into continuing the 37 practices of Bodhisattva. There's one thing I want to read today that's very interesting and really important. This is Max Planck, was the discoverer of quantum mechanics in physics. And he believed mind and consciousness to be the fundamental basis of physics and the fundamental basis of the cosmos. Panphysicist theories of the ancient past, like Hermetic philosophy and Vedanta and Buddhism, were already concluding all is mind, the universe is mind, consciousness is the fundamental substream of all there is. Recent theories of physics and cosmology are revealing that our brains work exactly like the cosmic web, the observable universe, and that the entire laws of physics can be described by neural networks alone. Recent theories of consciousness are demonstrating that the organization of energy in systems, cosmic systems, world systems, are directly related to the levels of consciousness of beings and vice versa, showing that consciousness might also be the function related to the morphogenesis, which is the generation of form and function in life. Max Planck said, I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. Everything that we talk about, everything that we regard as existing postulates consciousness. If our universe indeed has some form of fundamental consciousness, its mind might be the matrix behind the formation of all matter. So that's not a Buddhist talk. That's a physicist, someone who was really the first person to discuss quantum physics and mechanics.
How the universe functions.
Yeah, and when I asked Garchen Rinpoche about discussing some basic Buddha Dharma in this class, and he basically mentioned, make sure it's about mind. So I'll just throw that out there. This is a really cool Instagram page that's worth checking out also, and it's very cool. Light is Consciousness. Light is Consciousness on Instagram. Really interesting stuff. I think there's a website also. Okay, with that, I'll turn things over to Victoria.
You want to do meditation?
Why don't we do meditation at the end today?
Actually, completely not discussing it previously, Michael read that quote by Planck, who is a kind of, the father of quantum physics, and his university in Munich produces all these incredible physicists. But I started writing something kind of very, very similar a week ago for this class, and I'll read just a tiny little excerpt. And really it has to do with reminding ourselves every moment of our life that body, speech, and mind are continuum of how we exist in the world in these three dimensions. They're of course all one dimension, because the mind moves the speech, the mind moves the body, our consciousness is the actor. But consciousness is a process, just as everything else is in this universe. The body is like a factory that's always on and is never stoppable, because if it stops, then the body is dead, and we know that. Things are becoming, and we have to understand that nothing can hold that becoming. That's the point of interdependence and impermanence. It is constant change. Things arise as a result of connections of infinite amount of things, and everything is connected, and also things are transforming. So some things stop and other things begin as a result of that. Consciousness is a constant process of transformation. So that's a reminder for us that at every moment we stand at this, door where we choose to follow virtue or unvirtue. We discussed that in the previous paramita of Kshila, the ethical conduct, where we choose to pursue and embody ourselves in the world in virtuous activity or unvirtuous activity. We also previously spoke, and I wrote a little piece, that if you really observe consciousness, when we go to sleep, in the world, our consciousness creates this movie in which we star, called My Life, and this movie is this continuous becoming. And consciousness doesn't even require us to be awake for that movie to go on. When we lay down and we sleep, we don't need our sensory apparatus to be activated. We don't need stimulation from sensory information of sensory kind. We lay down to sleep for the third of our entirety of our life, and the movie continues. And we're always still the star. We're the producer, the director, the writer of this movie. So just always remember this, that at every moment of our existence, consciousness, our consciousness, we stand at this, constantly at this choice, at this fork, virtuous action, non-virtuous action. We are always happening. The only thing that is stable is the label. And our ignorance thinks and is deluded into thinking that if we label something like, my name is Victoria, that it gives it some kind of a permanence. But in fact, there's no such thing. And the label is also nothing. It's just, it's a little band-aid on something that is constantly evolving, constantly changing, constantly moving, constantly creating reality. That's what our mind does. It's a factory of reality. Very, very in sync with what Max Planck said. And we do it in our sleep. We do it in our waking. We do it all the time. There's nothing we can do not to do it, and going back now into the 6 paramitas, we're remembering, we spoke about it in the previous discussions in the 37 Bodhisattva practices, kind of 2 minds. They're not separated, but the 2 kinds of qualities of mind, the mind of ignorance that thinks that by labeling things we stabilize something and it permanently exists, and the mind of wisdom, the mind that knows and understands interdependence, becoming, and shunyata. The mind of wisdom that understands that we're always at this brink of choosing the virtuous from unvirtuous. The mind that knows that becoming is unimpeded. It is always happening. Consciousness is something that's not something that is. Consciousness is something that is always becoming. It's always changing. It's always creating reality as it goes. So we can have this, we can be either on the side of ignorance, which thinks that things are stable and exist, or on the side of prajna, the wisdom that understands, those 3 major Buddhist ground concepts: interdependence, impermanence, and shunyata, emptiness. That understands that reality is a stream. It's a happening, and underneath the stream, we know that there is, nature mind or Buddha nature. So ultimately, we arrive to the understanding through that. Especially in meditation, we decide that we attain and we strive and attain a definitive experience that through all this becoming, there is this mind of compassion. There is the nature, the ground of all this happening is the awareness, the nature of the mind, and it is an awareness of compassion. The universe is very compassionate. By compassion, in that teaching that Michael mentioned before, compassion is not being some nice guy. Compassion is something radically different. Compassion is, if we talk about the mind of ignorance that stabilizes things through sticking labels on it, the mind of ignorance that doesn't know that there's constant becoming and everything is a stream, everything is a movement. compassion is something that compassion is something that Chondro Rinpoche defined as selfless. It's something that does not have the label, does not have the me. So ignorance is the mind that's the lackey of selfishness, and this just ignorant mind that thinks that things are stabilized. And bodhicitta is the mind of awakening that knows, that there is no self. That's just a label. And so therefore, it's the mind that can choose a higher road and create and function out of a higher reality, and can be this mind of selflessness, not because it's a nice guy, but because it chooses to be liberated from the mind of ignorance. So that's how we come to it. And that's what paramita also means. We're going from the mind of samsara to the other shore, the other shore of enlightenment. And so the 6 paramitas, which are a complete teaching, it's a complete path, meaning that if they're attained, all 6 portions of, of this teaching, that enlightenment is also reached. And today, we're gonna practices are not regular way of understanding ordinary things. So we're not talking about patience or diligence. We're talking about transcendent patience, transcendent diligence, because we are, as bodhisattvas, are looking at it from the point of understanding reality as something that does not have a self, from this selfless, liberated, ever-changing movement. And we always stand at the brink of this, and we choose the transcendent action, not the mind of, the lackey of selfishness, not this kind of factual mind that can do something and say something, and we call it a fact or we call it true. But in fact, underneath it is nothing but some kind of like a selfish desire to hurt someone, or a selfish desire, to take away from someone, bodhisattvas are no longer driven by those kinds of mental imprints and those kinds of afflictions. They have already kind of understood all this to be samsaric garbage, and they base their actions because their mind is so deeply grounded in this understanding of selflessness. So, bodhicitta, all these activities flow out of the mind of compassion and out of the mind of light, the awakened mind. So our next stanza, number 27, is called Transcendent Patience. For a bodhisattva who desires the joy of virtue, all who harm him are like a precious treasure. Therefore, to cultivate patience toward all without resentment is a practice of a bodhisattva. And I'm reading this from The Heart of Compassion by Dilgo Rinpoche, where he discusses the 37 bodhisattva practices. And regarding this, the patience, transcendent patience, he says that there are 3 kinds of patience. The first is to bear without anger whatever harm people may do to you. And that is that first part is to not to surrender to the to anger and to the imprints, to the 5 poisons. That's what it means. So the first part of patience is directed to checking our own mind, state of our own mind, making sure that our actions are not guided by impatience, which very quickly turns and becomes anger. Second kind is to endure without sadness whatever hardship you may experience for the sake of Dharma. This is really truly stepping on the bodhisattva path and choosing the virtuous activity. And the third is to face without fear the profound meaning of the Dharma and the boundless qualities of the 3 jewels. For the first, when you feel that you're being harmed by someone, remember that the harm that person may be inflicting on you or someone dear to you is a direct result of your self, of yourself having harmed others in the past. Reflect that this person is so overpowered by delusion that he or she is as if possessed and cannot resist harming you. Remember too that if you can patiently accept all his harm, Many of your own past negative actions will be purified, and you will accumulate both merit and wisdom. Seeing all such situations in this way, train yourself not to get upset when someone harms you, and not to seek revenge, and never to bear the slightest grudge. So that's patience turned toward oneself, examining one's own state of awareness. If you react to an enemy with hatred and anger, he will certainly be leading you into the depths of the hell, to the hell realms. But if you know how to see such a person with deepest loving kindness, he can only lead you toward liberation. That's why every activity always stands at this fork. We either follow through our emotions being triggered by the 5 poisons, or we understand that, virtuous activity, no matter how it manifests in the world, like a person stepping on you, harming you, doing this and this, but if you do it from this awakened mind, will ultimately always leads to liberation. So this is what you do. So no matter how much harm he tries to do to you, it'll only do you good if you understand and you can choose out of the heart of awakening, out of the selfless mind of compassion. Then we move to...
Before we go on, this is a very difficult stanza for me, and for, especially when I first came to it, and for a lot of people, because some people will hear this as we should just let people harm us and not get mad and not seek revenge and not do anything. How does something like this go into, there are people who are, who are predated, people who, abuse, and people who receive this. Does not mean just to lay down and be a sacrificial lamb and allow people
not
to
at all
abuse you, but we have to speak to that a little
bit. Not at all. Of course, you look at the situation, you check it. There are many situations where we really do feel that we are receiving this harm as a karmic imprint. We are always receiving the harm due to our previous actions in this life or other lives. Needless to say, we don't just continue to stay in the same situation and be harmed over and over again. So when and if you can leave that situation, because the 30-some bodhisattvas practices spoke to before, when harmful people and harmful places should be avoided. If you've received the very kind of first thing of a situation like this, doesn't mean that you have to go back and back continuously into the situation to receive the same kind of harm. That's one kind of situation. Another kind of situation, when we're dealing with difficult situations and people we cannot leave behind, our parents, our children, things like that. So at that time, we really have to cultivate transcendent wisdom aspect of this activity, not a victim aspect of this activity. It's not about just like receiving the blow on the head and going, oh, let me put my other cheek. No, we practice in that very moment by saying, I have compassion for you, that person who's harming me. I have compassion because I understand the highly deluded state of mind that you are acting from. And we really consider that person like a mentally ill person, and we treat them like that. So we're not simply just responding by triggering the 5 poisons and going, oh, I hate you too now, and like go on flame, because, anger is a response when we don't want to be harmed. When somebody harms us, the natural response, our normal natural response is, anger is kind of a protection, but what happens is that we go on flame, and then while we're burning, whatever we touch burns too. So we understand that we need to replace the burning with wisdom, and if those are difficult situations and we cannot walk away from them, we apply other kinds of practices. We do Tonglen, we do whatever, we breathe out, we purify through 9 breath purifications. We try to lessen the fire in them and we never go on fire, because remember, two fires is like a bigger flame and it will burn more. And we always also remember, kind of like a little bit like why selfishness, that when anger arises in us and we're burning, it harms us way more than whatever we do and send out to other beings. Just remember, it's like if you're burning and you're on fire with anger, wherever you go, whatever you do, you set everything on flames. And we cannot, continue to pretend and mask this condition if we're in that mental state, that's not the consequence that constantly happens. There is no good way, or changing or transforming the other person or dissolving the anger situation out of one's own anger. You can only put out a fire if you're not on fire yourself. So, be that water bucket, be the fireman, and try to extinguish that person who's harming you instead of adding to the flame, And, always know yourself. Walk away from situations which you can walk away from. You don't need to go back and get reinfected and reflamed every single other time. But in situations which we cannot abandon, namely, those who are close to us, we're responsible for them. Our karmic connection with them has this kind of a lifelong, connection. Our interdependence with them requires a higher level of practice and a higher level of mind. So first, you watch that you don't get triggered. Second, you ask yourself, you don't say that person is bad, which silently means, well, I'm good and he's bad. No, we don't care about labels. That's not practice. We always ask ourselves, well, what do I do in order to change and transform that situation? And you find skillful means to transform that situation. That's the only question that needs to be asked. What do I do to change that situation? Not to create a label and continue with anger, continue on fire.
And it doesn't preclude defending oneself, from harm.
But you defend yourself from harm so much more with a clear mind. Of course.
But also,
you're
speaking to the mind, but I'm saying in practical terms that some people may confuse this with just allowing someone to hit you or something.
We're not talking about ordinary mental states of mind, because being a victim is being aggressive and being angry. So even though it appears that you're the recipient of this anger, it's also based on anger. So it's never about these kinds of ordinary states of mind. We're trying to cultivate a consciousness that sees a much more vast picture. We're treating that person who gives us harm as a mentally ill person. Consider yourself going into a mental institution and being a nurse, a caretaker, or a doctor. That's how we see ourselves. So we're never the victim, But if you go into a mental institution and some guy, comes out of his room and he spits on you, or like picks up a chair to like break it over your head, you don't pick up another chair and break it over his.
But you also don't have to allow him to put
the chair over.
This is what I'm saying.
You move to the side. And you move to the side and you never get the important thing is not to get triggered. I guarantee you too that when you're dealing with a habitually angry person, that's like a habitually mentally ill person, but you don't get triggered any longer by them. Eventually they'll stop being triggered by you, because you'll be like water and they'll be like fire. And you know what happens? Water and fire, there may be steam, but it's not going to be always like setting everything on fire. And eventually, they won't be able to touch you in any way, not physically, not verbally, not in any way. But that can only happen within, if you can create a vast atmosphere of mind, of selflessness, which can see, and then you can encompass that person and you can care for him properly out of that state of mind, not when you're reacting, because he's reacting too. So two reactions are not going to produce some kind of a new outcome that is going to transcend, the ordinary selfish mind. Good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really focusing on just something very specific, like because I think I've gone into this before, and a lot of people's concerns, it gets confused with this kind of turn the other cheek, or just like, it's not about
But it's
becoming allowing yourself to be a victim. It's one thing about looking at it in a certain way, but it's another thing is like reacting in the moment to situations where you're threatened with harm and things like that. I think that's what sometimes people get stuck.
yeah, I mean,
It's not about just looking at the situation while it's happening. Like certain situations, you have to respond and
yeah,
act in
I
situations. You
mean,
have to protect yourself or somebody you're with, or somebody, or a stranger, and things like
you
that.
you always protect yourself, but you protect yourself with, with a higher intelligence, with the bodhicitta intelligence. You don't protect yourself, by getting reactivated by that and triggered by that person and
Right.
becoming a maniac yourself. You can, because the minute you are triggered and you're, reactivated, and react with your five poisons, you have lost all clarity anymore. You can do until that flame goes out, like little by little. But the minute you react as opposed to act, you've lost all ground. You've sacrificed everything. Needless to say, be intelligent. Try not to walk into difficult situations, especially if they're repetitive. Avoid difficult places, and negative people as much as you can. And in places where it is unavoidable, work like hell to transform. And the transformation starts with you. If you're like the little spot in that difficult space which is transformed, like in mental institution, the patients also know who is the doctor and who is the nurse, and their attitude shifts drastically toward them. Eventually we do get through, and so that's the position that we want to attain for ourselves. It's not about, that the patient runs out of his room and bangs on us day and night.
Cool.
The next stanza is Transcendent Diligence, and it's called Virya in Sanskrit. And it's really, Virya means, Virya means virility. Our word virility comes from it, something that's unstoppable activity. But the very important thing about understanding this particular paramita is that it is joyful. First of all, it is a antidote to any kind of laziness, especially spiritual laziness. For example, it's spiritual laziness to feel like you're a victim, okay? Because being a victim is an aggressive behavior. If you really dissect it, it's, your aggression that's taking the beating, but going, I hate you because you're doing this to me. We're trying to get rid of all these kinds, because that's still like a mind of ignorance. That's still not seeing, and also like not recognizing that we're getting triggered. So virya is this unstoppable activity that is completely based on mind of enlightenment, on bodhicitta, on mind of love and compassion. It is activity, unstoppable and joyful activity for the sake of, uh, you know, attaining enlightenment for oneself, so that we can bring all others to that other side. So we can take them out of samsara, the endless, ocean of samsara, of birth, old age, sickness, and death, and bring them to the shore of enlightenment. You know, uh, we want to activate in everyone their Buddha nature, the true kind of, state where we should be. And the stanza reads, stanza number 28, merely for their own sake, even Shravakas and Prayateka Buddhas make effort like someone whose hair is on fire, trying to put it out. Seeing this, for the sake of all beings, to practice diligence, the source of excellent qualities, is a practice of a bodhisattva. That first line of the stanza, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, are those beings who attain what in Buddhism is called a partial enlightenment, especially in the Mahayana and Vajrayana tradition, because there is that level, that kind of a capacity where we want to transcend our own afflictions. We understand the emptiness of self, and we can quench, some of our afflictions, but we don't go further as to have the Mahayana motivation, the Bodhisattva motivation, that not only do I want to quench the afflictions inside myself, but I'm first for one doing it, because when I quench the afflictions in myself, that means that I never set the world on fire anymore. That means that I never pollute it with my anger, with my jealousy, with my ignorance. I never turn away from beings. So the Mahayana, the Bodhisattva vow, which is, the basis of the Mahayana, second turning of the wheel by Buddha, and that is the altruistic intention to bring all beings, to establish all beings who now we understand because of interdependence that are our mothers. We want to establish them in complete, perfect Buddhahood. And Dilgo Khyentse says that to awaken and to develop all paramitas, diligence is vital. Diligence is the joyous effort and active determination to carry out positive actions. As I said, being a bodhisattva, being a sentient being, you're always at the fork, because consciousness is a process. You are every moment of your being, waking and not even waking, standing at the fork, the crossroad, virtuous action, non-virtuous action, mind of enlightenment, stupid mind of ignorance and selfishness, active determination to carry out positive actions without any expectation or self-satisfaction. Diligence has three aspects. The first is called armor-like diligence, and that pertains to the self. It's like all the other paramitas, they always start with check your own mental state first, So armor-like diligence is to develop a joyous courage and fortitude, which you wear like armor against discouragement, The second is diligence in action, which is to set about accumulating merit through practice of the 6 paramitas without delay or procrastination. The third is diligence that cannot be stopped, an insatiable and unremitting energy to work for the sake of others. Diligence should permeate all practice of other paramitas and invigorate them all. So the first kind of diligence, armor-like diligence, that pertains to checking ourselves, is to put on the armor of a strong and courageous determination that you will never fall prey to obstacles created by negative emotions, attachment to comfort, physical sickness, or death, but will persist, come what may, in your efforts to accomplish the extraordinary activities of the Bodhisattva until you have established all beings in enlightenment. Second kind of diligence in action is determined by perseverance in the actual application of that wish. And the third kind of diligence that cannot be stopped is insatiable energy to work constantly for the sake of others. Day and night engage in every possible way, directly or indirectly. Notice how he says day and night, in your thoughts, words, and deeds to benefit all beings. If you are not able to help them directly, you should keep nothing in your mind but the benefit of others and dedicate everything toward the attainment of their attainment of Buddhahood. And dedicate here is a technical term. So when we, that's what we do at the end of practice, if you cannot help them actively, you do Tonglen, you do other practices, and you always dedicate your merit to those who need our help. And so
I think what we'll do today, we'll answer some questions and we'll close out the class with meditation today. So we'll do like 10-15 minutes of questions and meditate at the end. Okay. I appreciate your preparation and the care you put into your words, somebody said. Is there a method pushing away negative emotions, avoid holding grudges or reacting with passive aggressive, like count to 10? I mean, we're really kind of speaking to those things. The more you practice meditation, that's the whole point, is starting to work on your mind, to tame your mind to a point when you can start to have a gap between action, between what happens and your reaction, between your thought and your speech and things like that. That's why we meditate. This is the process. Just by hearing Victoria read these things and agreeing with it, or it makes sense to you, does not mean that you've assimilated this and realized it. I mean, I think that's where a lot of times we get caught up. Before I was into Buddhism, before I became a Buddhist, I went to a lot of different teachings, different spiritual paths, and have since I've been a Buddhist. And a lot of the times it's somebody speaks and you listen to it and it all makes great sense. And you think, yes, this makes great sense. And then, the next day you're back into your own habitual behavior, because just because you learned something does not mean you've assimilated into your mode of being, into the way you operate in interface with the world. That's why there's practice. That's why the first of the 37 practice says ceaselessly hearing, pondering, and meditating. It takes a lot of practice and a lot of study and a constant effort day by day to make progress, to start to dismantle this habituated mind. In Tibetan, meditation is called gom, which means to become familiar with. You're becoming familiar with the way your mind works. This is a process. You have to understand. It's not just about hearing it and saying, now I know how to act. So, I can't say that there's one thing you can do. You can, when you're in the situation, just try to look at your mind and try to see and remember that reacting from this very heightened, poisonous place with anger or things like that is always going to result in similar qualities.
And if I may add, when we do Tonglen, the higher point practice of Tonglen, we always meditate on our enemies. So what we do is we bring up the person, we bring up the to them, and we take from them the dark and we dissolve it into light. So when a situation arises, we do that on the cushion. So when a situation arises and you are with that person or another person, indeed, you should slow your mind down and observe your consciousness. Watch your mind. Watch how they trigger you. See how the emotion arises. And yes, take a moment, take a moment. And that's practice. That's meditation in action. Take a moment and see that anger arise in front of you. And in Buddhism, they say that when, the emotion of anger, the poison of anger, when it is transmuted and, becomes, a wisdom, that particular wisdom is called mirror-like wisdom. Watch that emotion, see it right in front of you. Why is it mirror-like wisdom? Because it's just our mind. The anger is not out there. The anger is here. It's our mind. Watch it, look at it, smile at it, and let it dissolve. Slow it down. Play the movie like a slow motion movie. That is practice. Watch that person be angry, have compassion, do Tonglen, whatever you need to do, and by that, slow down your mind. Watch how the anger arises, laugh at it, and dissolve it, At least transform it. If you can see your anger face to face, like arising in that moment, use, skillful means. Use Tonglen, use 9-breath purification. Do something. Don't act on that. It's okay if it arises, as long as you're not acting on it. Eventually, it won't arise as frequently, and it won't be that strong.
Just a reminder, any questions that are off topic are not going to be addressed or answered, so you may as well not waste the effort. I have a friend who's become very bitter about past regrets and is beginning to erode everything good and kind about them. Is there any teachings how to accept and leave regrets behind? Basically what Victoria was addressing, I think it spoke about today, addresses that very directly. But the question you really have to ask is if your friend's going to be able to hear them. You may be able to hear them. You're here in the class for meditation and basic Buddha Dharma, but is your friend. So, you know, your friend has to make that decision whether they're open to those things. Eventually this class will be posted on YouTube so they can access that, or you know, this book, for instance, this is The Heart of Compassion by Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, The Heart of Compassion. You know, if someone wants to commit to it's, again, what I'm saying is it's not so easy just to say, here's this, here's this pithy teaching. It's not necessarily going to change your life. You know what I mean? Unless you start to practice it, unless you start to implement it and things like that. And you have a willingness and an openness to do that.
But for your own self, from what can you bring to that situation instead of just watch them suffer, you can remind them of all the good they have done, because there's no small good that someone has done. Remind them, if you can't really openly talk about their Buddha nature, remind them of their light, because sometimes people in their bitterness, which is what we were just talking about, the victim mentality. Victim mentality is aggression, and you can sink into that state very, very deeply, very difficult to get out of it. Forms of depression are also those kinds of, events in our lives. So trying to dismantle it, I think the best counters is to remind people of the light, to remind them of all the good they have done for you. You have received love from them. That's why you call them a friend. So reignite that memory and reignite that reality inside yourself. Bring that into the room when you're with them, not just kind of like listen to their words, how they're slumping down deeper and deeper into this kinds of darkness. But bring the light, remind them of love, how you love them because they gave you love and you call them a friend, and remind them, find little things to remind them of all the good they have done. Maybe they feel a lot of impotence right now in their life. Maybe they're not seeing, opportunities for, virtuous action. That's very satisfying to all of us, remind them of all those things. And, just remind them, about the bond that you have, the bond of love. Otherwise, you wouldn't call them your friend.
This is a similar, some of the questions are very similar, so I'm kind of combining some of them. So if I'm not answering yours, I'm trying to do it in combination with others. How do you, so this is a guy's talking about his father who's a bully, and he's avoids him all he can, but he can't all the time. When I meet his anger with my anger, to stand up for myself, I feel mixed emotions. Yeah. But sometimes when I don't stand up for myself and I walk away, I lose respect for myself. Someone else said this about shame. So how do we diffuse situations, avoid situations without, it goes to what we were saying before. It's like, we're not talking about just accepting harm. We're not talking about allowing someone to harm you. You're allowing someone to harm you is not helping them, because you're allowing them to create negative karma. You know what I mean? Listen, there's some situations where, and I'm not, you may be in a position where you may have to hit somebody. I don't know. You know what I mean? You may have to protect some innocent person or someone you're with, and you may be teaching them. I'm not advocating violence, but you may be inserted into a situation where you may have to react to just stop somebody from doing something. We're not talking, and I don't say that advocating violence, but there's situations where you may be put into a situation where you have to teach somebody something, and that's a very tricky place to be. But if you are working diligently and steadily with your negative emotions, you're going to be a lot more clear on how to handle situations like that. And I think the shame is coming out of more
surrender.
I think the shame's coming more out of habituated response to these situations. Obviously, if your father's been bullying you, and I'm assuming that's been going on for a long time, it's probably shame is a very common reaction to this situation and to his behaviors.
But also, we need to think about the sources of bullying. Usually it's a person who has no control and is trying to exert control wherever it's possible. Then it becomes very habitual behavior, and so one doesn't examine it any longer and cannot break the mechanical nature of that behavior. But if you find a place inside yourself where you could tell your father, I love you, without you asserting yourself like a beast, and I have respect for you, and you don't need to engage in this kind of behavior all the time, that I love you without you acting in such a way, trying to be domineering and maintain control over your life or over your past, or maintaining control over whatever sources that brought him to that behavior, because no behavior is ever without its source, without its cause. And if we try to understand the source, be the doctor in the mental institution, try to go to the source, try to dismantle it, and choose an action that transcends this engagement, because guilt, being stumped on and feeling painful and feeling guilty, is just being triggered. But you have to get out of that little egg and create a bigger situation. If you can give your father a bigger situation, a bigger understanding, where maybe you're the father and he's the child, you can maybe change the nature of your relationship, but you can only do it if you can bring something into it other than being triggered by negative emotion.
I find it easy to see the benefit of not forming attachments to physical objects or pleasant experiences, but it seems impossible not to form attachments to people. How do you balance that? That's a very good question, obviously. And part of it is talking about equanimity. Part of it's talking about love. It's where the attachment gets
Polluted.
yeah, toxic, and that's where wisdom comes in. Knowing when attachment verges into the toxic and negative. I think there's a difference between love and attachment, if you will. You know what I mean? Attachment, that word connotates codependence, if you will. You know what I mean? We're not talking just attachment meaning love. Obviously, you're attached to your children. If you have children, you have a responsibility to them. You love them. You protect them. You could say that it's attachment. You could also say that it's love. If your child or adults now ready to go off in the world, and you still feel they should stay at home and be, your children, into their 30s and 40s, then you're talking about some kind of, negative, toxic kind of attachment. I think that's where wisdom comes in. We're not saying you're going to become indifferent to everybody.
It's the opposite.
Yeah. I think we should meditate and then dedicate the merit from today's practice, the benefit of well-being. Let's do 9 minutes of meditation. We'll start with the 9 purifying breaths and then just go right into meditation. Great. One thing we always have to remember also is that when you hear teaching like this, it's not for you to think how you should have been behaving your whole life. You know what I mean? You can't be either down on yourself or dismiss it because you haven't been doing this your whole life. Do you know what I mean? We have to remember that as well. And like I said, just hearing something, I mean, it can be a seed, it can be a key that starts to unlock something, but just hearing something does not mean, and you understanding it and making sense does not mean now you're gonna,
Act on it.
change completely the way you behave in life. This is a process, this is practice, this is turning your mind towards something new in a lot of ways. And this is not, it's not something to ornament your life. It's not something to ornament yourself uh, as a new component to adding on to everything you already have. It's really a dismantling and a reconstruction of the way we've interacted with the world and the way we've seen ourselves and the way we've responded to situations. And if you're not really into that, if that's not something you want, that's probably not the right path for you. And that might sound a little harsh, but it's really, really, really true. It's not here. It's not a path to reify the self or to kind of prop up the self that's already there or make you feel better. It's really to start. It's a very revolutionary approach in a fundamental way. I mean, we have a couple of more minutes, if that's okay, Nick.
It's in the fundamental way, and it's in every moment. We change. There's life is happening every moment, so we always have the choice which way to act, which mind to act on, what to do. That's happening in every moment. And Buddhist teaching is always done on three levels: hearing, which is what we're doing now in discussion; pondering, analysis, what you do on your own. You really think, how to implement this into my life, how do I need to, and meditation when you're enacting these scenarios here on the cushion so that you can go and permeate your life with it. You remember your training when you get off the cushion, all the meditational training, which is the experiential understanding, and when it sinks into you after hearing and pondering, after hearing and analysis, that meditational thinking, that experiential thing is what you take into the world and how you interact with it. That's what it's for life.
Okay, this question, two people have basically asked the same question in a way. Coming to terms of reconciling negativity you may have put out into this world in the past or it's towards someone after and realizing now in hindsight that you could have taken a better path. Well, if you could have done better, you would have, but you couldn't have in the past. Right? So, the best way to reconcile the past is to act differently in the present. You can't really do anything in the past. You can make amends if it's not hurtful to that person, and if there's a way to make amends to that person. You can take responsibility, you can make restitution, you can do all those kind of things, right? If that's not possible, or if you've already done that, you have to just understand that that's where you were at the time. You weren't able to act differently, or you chose not to at that point. But now you're making a decision not to engage in those behaviors again, making a really firm resolve not to do that kind of thing again, and learning from that. And the truth is, there's, all we have is this moment. The future hasn't happened, and the past is done. So neither the past or the future really exist. They have no essence to them, or there's nothing to them. There is the moment, and there is the present, and you can choose to act differently now, and not repeat those behaviors if you apply yourself, or apply these teachings or some kind of teachings, mindfulness, awareness, to to your life, basically, in every moment.
And as long as this is a teaching so that you can transform your behavior moving from this moment on, and as opposed to just sinking on the notion of guilt or another kind of emotional trigger. So make this about a transformative element as opposed to an element that kind of sinks you back into the five triggers.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for teaching today, commenting on the 37 practices. Let's dedicate the merit from today's class to the benefit of all beings. By this merit, may all beings attain the state of enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusions. May they be liberated from this ocean of samsara and its pounding waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. Yeah, notice what that just says is, by this merit, may all beings attain the state of enlightenment and conquer the enemies of faults and delusions. Those are the enemies that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Faults and delusions. So remember that. Thank you, Nick, for your kindness and generosity. Thank you all for coming today. We will see you next week.